Good afternoon. It seems that non-duality, whenever I read about non-duality, whenever I go to a web page from the non-dualists, I feel kind of bogged down in the philosophy that's grown around this basically simple truth. And it's just too convoluted for me. And it only pointed out to me that somehow, for better or worse, I'm destined to approach an understanding of something by careful, rigorous examination, contemplation, reflection on what it isn't. It makes me think maybe I'm kind of a backwards guy. I don't know, maybe I do things backwards. Maybe you're supposed to figure out what it is and then you can dismiss what it isn't. But it's not my process. It's just like a tour book, a guidebook. I've got a shelf full of guidebooks, but I've never once read it prior to visiting the country. It's pretty much meaningless to me if I haven't been there. I have no reference, no benchmarks. But after I've been to a country, I read them quite thoroughly and get a lot of enjoyment because it means something to me. I've been to those places. Even now, I like to pick up a book about Taiwan. Lonely Planet has always been my favorite group of travel books. I know there's other good ones out there, but pick up the latest revision, the latest edition of the Taiwan Lonely Planet guide. And I find it fascinating. I even get some ideas. I haven't done that yet. Maybe I ought to go do that. But it's really meaningful, even though I've lived here completely immersed in the country and the culture for 21 years. The same goes for me with note-taking. I don't write a to-do list. I don't write down that prior to doing. I do keep a list. I keep a diary, but it's only as I've lived that day. Again, it's after. So, I wanted to celebrate this process. This is my own methodology, my own way of doing things. I need benchmarks. I need reference points. So again, in the spirit of understanding non-duality, rather than what it is, it seemed more natural, more conducive to my way of doing things, to look at it, to look at what it isn't. And in the spirit, this is where the dualities, apparent dualities, keep popping up with me over and over again on a daily basis. And again, I see these dualities contained in the Tai Chi or the yin-yang circle. I see them as a continuity. I see the opposite, apparent opposites actually being an expression of each other. They're intrinsically necessary. You can't have one without the other. Day without night makes little sense. If it was always day, we wouldn't have a word for day. It would just always be day or always be night. Even in the polar areas where they have the long days and the long nights, periods of darkness, periods of lightness, they still have a comparison. So this is how I see dualities. And this recognizing what's not so about dualities, that they're separate and unique, opposed to one another, seeing that they're not this, is my way of understanding non-duality. And another one came to mind, surprise, surprise, another one came to mind, empathy and apathy. And I embrace these apparent polarities, these opposites, these polar differences. I embrace them because it's yet another chance to see if my understanding of non-duality holds up. It's my nature to test and retest. To be skeptical is my MO. Does it pass the test of time? So I started looking at empathy and apathy. But I wanted to get a better understanding because it was a little cloudy, maybe perhaps, about my understanding about empathy. Whereas apathy, not caring, is a concept much easier understood, much easier to grasp for me. And I question, why is that so? And I wanted to look at empathy because I thought pretty much empathy, compassion, sympathy could be used interchangeably. And if anything, I thought that empathy must include wanting to help, wanting to do something to change this condition that one saw out of pity. To get involved and actually try to help the individual to change. I thought that was empathy. Because after joining a couple groups on Facebook about empaths, it didn't take me long to understand that I wasn't an empath. I had empathy, but empathy and empaths are different. And that's a topic for another day. Today we're looking at what is empathy. So I went and did a little research, and I'll try to squint and lean close to my screen and read it. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Empathy refers more generally to our ability to take the perspective and to feel the emotions of another person. And the next part, why is compassion? And compassion and sympathy are much more closely related. So, squinting again, compassion is when these feelings and thoughts include the desire to help. Compassion, sympathy means suffer together. The literal meaning of compassion is suffer together. And it's not the same as empathy or altruism, although the concepts are related. No, I got help on this. Sympathetic, which we can use as a more close in meaning to compassion, sympathy. Sympathetic, pity, concern for the sufferings of others, kindness and caring, and a willingness to help others. See, this includes some action. The difference, one last thing, if you bear well, no, I got to another thing. The difference between compassion and empathy. Compassion is the ability to feel for another living being. Empathy is the ability to not only understand another's feelings, but also to become one with that person's distress, to put yourself in their shoes and imagine what they're going through in that situation. So I had kind of confused I was a little confused because I thought that, well, let's put what I thought aside for a minute and go to one last research that I've done about the differences. I'll read first empathy. Ability to identify and understand another person's feeling. Now, compassion. Feelings of sympathy, pity, concern for the misfortune and suffering of others. Now, empathy evokes understanding. Compassion evokes feelings like pity, sympathy, and concern. Empathy implies that you understand the other person's situation. Compassion does not imply that you understand the other person's situation. Empathy doesn't necessarily mean that you are motivated to help a person. Compassion implies that you're motivated to help that person. So it seems that compassion, at least in the little c, includes doing something about it, at least being willing to do something about it, while empathy means that you can put yourself in their shoes, you can become them, so to speak, and feel what they feel. But empathy does not include the action of actually doing something about it. And in my understanding, my compassion with a capital C is closer to what I've read to you about empathy. And when we talked about the four yogic paths that are 100%, although of Hindu origin, 100% accepted by at least Zen Buddhism. And I thought of Bhakti Yoga, devotion, through the worship of outwardly your guru, your teacher, the Dharma, with the goal of obtaining bliss and joy, being in the state of constant bliss and joy. So your external focus is on loving teachers, teaching and the teachers, and chanting, and this kind of complete unconditional love. And somehow this is how I saw my compassion with a big C. Unconditional love. Not necessarily encompassing doing something, the action to actually help someone. Perhaps Mother Teresa and her work is an example of the small C, where she put her money where her mouth was and went and did something about it. Made an effort to do something to change the situation of those that she felt compassion towards. So you can see how pondering on apparent dualities, empathy and apathy, it led me to research, to get a better grasp on how we use these words. And when I look at empathy, the ability to walk in the other's shoes. Don't judge anyone until you walked a mile in their shoes. And I realized that I'm always been empathetic in that I could quickly grasp, ascertain anyone's condition that came into my aura, came into my world. I could see clearly what was troubling them, and could quickly offer advice, whether they wanted it or not, which led to a lot of problems for me. And at a certain point in my life where I didn't really care that much, maybe care is too strong of a word, but I wasn't really concerned with the impact of the information that I would give them. I could see things about people that perhaps they hadn't even been willing to face on their own. Not only see them, but comment with the intent of offering some alternatives, perhaps even solutions to what was their problem or troubles. And after you hit your head against the wall, after making efforts for so long, it finally maybe dawned on me that this was not only unrewarding because it usually fell on deaf ears, but in many cases it was counterproductive because this was their karmic debt, their obligation to sort, to discern, to find their solutions. So I thought I was being empathetic, but I was crossing that line to the small c, compassion, where I felt motivated to do something about it. And at first, I used to separate because I wasn't physically do something about it, but I would orally, I would speak it out. And actions are deeds. All I had to do is look at the consequences. And it's ironic that it wasn't the consequences that really got to me. It wasn't the fact that people didn't listen, they might get angry, they dismissed it rapidly, quickly, only to come to me years later and say, hey, you know what you said to me years ago? That leveled me, it knocked me to the ground, but it stuck with me for 5, 10 years. And I just wanted to tell you that you were right and that I've been working on that. Well, it's never been very important to me to be correct. Never has. But it was always made me feel good that they indeed had made progress, because I never had doubt in this process. But when I decided to give it a rest, to give it up, is when I put down everything else from my strict Raja, the royal path, Raja yogic training, seeking clarity through taming, quieting, and ultimately silencing my mind. When I put that load down as undoable for me, maybe a little bit like when Buddha had tried everything and he gave up. I hadn't tried everything, but I tried a lot of things. But I had stubbornly stuck to 30 years of rigorous training that really wasn't producing much except a weariness, a tiredness, a feeling that I carried the weight of the world on my shoulders. Was letting this down. It was being able to eat chicken, a little fish, after 30 years of being a vegetarian, only to find out that once I changed my diet to include protein, animal source protein, I lost 40 pounds in less than a year, and have kept it off against all odds for 4 years now, as I listen finally to my body and give it what it needs. My body needs protein. Not only did I lose the weight, but people told me, just look 10 years younger. And this is one of the claims that they talk about. You switch to a vegan diet. Hey, but remember, one size doesn't fit all. Our job is to find out, to determine what suits us. And it's really from listening. So putting down this burden of this strict regime of approaching meditation as a martial art that had to be an effort, that I had to sweat, worried about my posture, sitting erect. I just let it all go. And I have to share with you that the rewards for doing this have been incalculable. Unbelievably rewarding to give it up, to let it go. So the part of the letting it go, the empathy that I understood that I was experiencing, not compassion, but once I let the doing of compassion, this little seed that seems to be part of what compassion is, of doing something about it, feeling obligated to do something about it, being uncomfortable with the condition that I saw the world and the people around me appear to be in. This is where the urge to do something. But I also, after looking at this over the passage, this has been 4 or 5 years since this letting go happened. Looking at, could judgment be involved in my experience of compassion? I didn't feel judgment in empathy, in being empathetic, but in compassion with a little c, there is some pity, some feeling sorry, which are indeed judgments. Not judgments in the sense that we really consider judgments of what's good and what's bad, but putting a label, looking at them as lesser, looking at them as unfortunate. And as I let go this burden of Raja Yoga, this discipline, as I let it go, it came to be so obvious that most things are intrinsically unknowable for me at this stage of my development. And I'm more than okay with that. So, not understanding the purpose of the conditions that each of us are in, without an understanding, any kind of solution, no matter how well-spirited, right-minded, well-intended it is or was, is not appropriate. It's beyond my job description. And that's when equanimity really blossomed as my constant state of mind, moment by moment by moment, is embraced in equanimity. So to go back to where I started, the beginning of this sharing, the Tai Chi, the yin and the yang, the circle of empathy, and apathy. And apathy even though it was easier for me to understand apathy, I think for many it might be, the reverse might be so. Empathy might lend itself more readily to your understanding, but this is how it was for me. But when I saw that, as in the yin and the yang, apathy is a small dot within the half circle of empathy. And even within apathy is the seed of empathy. So I learned that embracing apathy not in the sense that I didn't care, but in the knowledge that I couldn't make a difference. No matter how much I understood their situation, no matter how I could put myself in their shoes, no matter the compassion of offering solutions, all of this ended up being for naught. As my favorite ex-brother-in-law used to tell me, he called it senseless pain. And I had become an expert in senseless pain, for carrying burdens, trying to repair, fix things that didn't even need fixing, probably, and certainly not by me. The relief and the blessing came from this.